In the dim light of an old Nashville stage, Charlie Rich, the silver fox, stood before his piano with eyes sadder than the silver in his hair. No one imagined that the man who once captivated all of America carried so much loneliness within him. Then came the night of the 1975 CMA Awards, when, before millions of viewers, he set fire to the envelope announcing the winner. Live on national television. That moment changed his entire career and left Nashville wondering, who was Charlie Rich rebelling against? The industry or himself? Behind the elegance and the genre-crossing voice, Charlie Rich was a soul torn in two, between jazz and country, between artistic freedom and the pressure of fame. This is the story of a gifted man, the scandal that shook Nashville, and the silent tragedy that turned the Silver Fox into one of the most enigmatic figures in country music history. Charlie Rich was born in 1932 in Colt, Arkansas, a tiny town with only a few dirt roads and endless cotton fields stretching to the horizon. Life there was slow, poor, and filled with long, quiet afternoons, carrying nothing but the sound of the wind and the smell of soil after rain. In that farming family, young Charlie grew up with the stillness of the southern countryside and eyes that always seemed older and more contemplative than his age. Music came to Charlie in the most natural way. His mother played piano in the local church, and she was the one who placed his small hands on the keys for the very first time. When the notes filled their wooden house, his parents realized that this child carried something different. Softer soul, easier to bruise. On Arkansas summer afternoons, Charlie sat before an old radio, listening to anything he could catch. The powerful gospel of the church, blues so sorrowful they could crush your heart, and jazz that shimmered like the lights of a distant world. That mixture created a Charlie Rich unlike anyone else, a boy with too many musical colors inside him to ever choose just one path. But Charlie's childhood was also painted with loneliness. While other children ran through the fields, Charlie sought refuge in the piano. He played in silence, with no audience and no spotlight, only himself and the melodies that America would one day hear in behind closed doors. On quiet nights in Colt, when the summer cicadas finally fell silent, young Charlie would stare into the dark sky and wonder, could music take me beyond these old wooden fences? Or would it become a dream I meant to hide for the rest of my life? That question became the flame that lit Charlie Rich's entire journey, and the reason his path was both beautiful and unbearably sorrowful. Charlie Rich's path into music was anything but easy. After serving in the U.S. Air Force, where he played saxophone and piano for the military band, he moved to Memphis with a single dream: to make a living through music. He found an opportunity at Sun Records, the same place where Elvis, Johnny Cash, and Jerry Lee Lewis had already carved their legends. Yet it was there that Charlie became the hardest artist to define. He was too jazz to be country, too country to be jazz, too bluesy for the mainstream. And Nashville had no idea where he belonged. Charlie drifted through small bars, writing songs for others, recording countless demos that almost no one noticed. While his peers shot to stardom, his career stayed stuck in one place. Alcohol began creeping into his life, and the string of disappointing nights made him want to quit more than once. But each time despair crept in, Charlie sat back down at the piano. It was those lost, wandering years that carved the depth in his voice, the depth that would one day make all of America stop and listen. In the early 1970s, when many believed Charlie Rich's time had already passed, fate quietly prepared a turning point he himself could never have foreseen. His contract with Epic Records led him to Billy Sherrill, One of the very few men in Nashville sensitive enough to look past Charlie's quiet exterior and recognize a musical soul far too complex to be boxed in. During their very first session, when Charlie opened his mouth to sing, Cheryl understood he had found more than a vocalist. He had found a soul colored by contradictions, the softness of jazz, the ache of blues, the glow of gospel, and the honesty of country. Then 1973 arrived like a late spring. Behind closed doors came to life, unlike anything Nashville had ever heard. It wasn't loud, it wasn't showy. It was simply a luxurious, melancholic love song that made people pause in the middle of their busy days. And that softness became a storm. The song carried Charlie to the grandest stages in America, bringing him Grammy, ACM, and CMA Awards. Honors he once only dared to look at from afar, as if they belonged to dreams meant for someone else. But the glory didn't stop there. The most beautiful girl arrived like a second wave, stronger, more unexpected. For the first time in his life, Charlie Rich stood where almost no country artist of that era had ever stood. #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. A man once dismissed as not fit for the market had become the symbol of a new harmony between country and pop, opening doors for entire generations to follow. At the height of his stardom, Charlie Rich stood under the spotlight like a fascinating mystery, his silver hair striking, his demeanor elegant yet introspective, and his voice sounding as if he were both whispering and confessing his heart's sins at the same time. People were captivated by his subtlety, his ambiguity, his unpredictability. And it was precisely those qualities that turned him into a phenomenon, an artist who could simply stand still and still command attention. But behind that light was a truth few understood. Success placed Charlie in the center of a massive industry machine, a machine that wanted him to permanently remain the soft, sweet, market-friendly silver fox. They wanted him to repeat the formula that had created miracles. They wanted him to sing what they believed would fit radio, fit the charts, and fit the label's financial expectations. But Charlie Rich, with a heart that always leaned toward freedom, began to feel trapped in a suit far too tight. He longed to experiment, to break free from the mold others had built around him, to return to being himself, like the days when he sat alone in that old Memphis studio. And just as he reached the highest peak, the first cracks appeared. Cracks that outsiders would only notice when it was already too late. Cracks that would lead him toward one of the most shocking moments in country music history. Behind the shimmering silver aura of the silver fox, Charlie Rich was a man living inside a far more intricate inner world than his calm exterior suggested. In 1952, he married Margaret Ann, a woman who wasn't just his partner, but his second soul. The two stayed together for nearly 50 years, a rare and remarkable endurance in an industry that so often pulls people apart. Margaret Ann wasn't just his wife. She was the first listener to every demo, the one who corrected every line, the anchor when Charlie collapsed under the weight of failure. She understood that behind the suave stage presence was a deeply insecure man, always afraid he wasn't good enough, wasn't talented enough, wasn't worthy of the love audiences poured onto him. They had 4 children, and inside that small home, Charlie Rich appeared entirely different. Gentle, quiet, sometimes so withdrawn that the family had to leave him alone so he could escape the maze of his own thoughts. He loved his children, yet carried the stillness of an artist who lived perpetually between light and shadow. Charlie was the kind of person who felt too deeply to live normally. He was a perfectionist to the point of self-destruction. A wrong note, an imperfect performance, could haunt him for an entire week. And even when America celebrated him, he often felt like just a man struggling to find his rightful place in his own life. What few people realized was this: that silky, velvety voice was born from a heart so sensitive that even the smallest sadness could create a fracture. He couldn't hide his emotions, and he didn't want to. Family was the only place where Charlie Rich felt truly safe. The one space where he could let go of the silver fox and simply be Charlie. A man trying to stay balanced between art and life, between the light and the shadows inside himself. The pressure that came with sudden success slowly turned into a dark shadow, following Charlie Rich everywhere he went. Nashville wanted him to maintain the image of a golden star with soft, polished crossover hits. But Charlie only wanted freedom. He wanted to experiment, to break the mold, to escape the formula they were forcing onto him. Then came the night of the 1975 CMA Awards, the moment that would send his career spiraling in a completely different direction. Standing on stage to announce Entertainer of the Year, Charlie opened the envelope, saw the winner's name, John Denver, and suddenly pulled out a lighter, setting the paper on fire in front of millions of viewers watching live. The room went silent. Nashville was stunned. Some said he was disrespecting the new generation. Others claimed he was protesting the commercialization of country music. But for Charlie, it was nothing more than the eruption of a soul that had been suppressed for far too long. After that night, Nashville's doors closed on him. Radio stations stopped playing his songs, producers kept their distance, and contracts slowly vanished. A career at its peak suddenly plunged into free fall. Charlie faded into the shadows. Alcohol became a companion, and doubt became the constant sound echoing through nights that no longer had music. It wasn't a scandal. It was the tragedy of an artist who was too honest for a world that always demanded comfort. Even though his career was cut short, the legacy Charlie Rich left behind stretches far beyond the years he spent on stage. His voice, a blend of country, soul, jazz, and blues, became a sound Nashville could never label, and one that no one has been able to recreate to this day. Songs like Behind Closed Doors, The Most Beautiful Girl, Rollin' with the Flow, and A Very Special Love Song still echo on country radio as reminders that subtlety and sophistication also have a place in a genre often defined by simplicity. Charlie Rich deeply influenced generations that followed, from Ronnie Milsap and Mickey Gilley to Keith Whitley. And even modern artists like Chris Stapleton have acknowledged him as an inspiration. He was one of the pioneers of country crossover, bringing the genre beyond its traditional borders without ever losing its soul. Awards may fade, but emotion never disappears. And that is why Charlie Rich's name endures, not because of scandal nor because of glamorous myth-making, but because of a voice that touched the deepest parts of the human heart. After the turmoil of the 1975 CMA incident, Charlie Rich quietly withdrew from the spotlight. He no longer chased hits, no longer cared about staying marketable. Instead, he chose to slow down, spending time with his family, playing music only when he felt like it, and staying away from the stages that had drained him for so many years. His later performances were smaller, warmer, like honest conversations between an artist who had grown tired of the world and the listeners who still loved him. With nothing left to prove, Charlie sang purely from instinct and memory. His health slowly declined. In his final years, Charlie carried more reflection than hope, yet he kept the nightly ritual of sitting at his piano. To him, music was never just a way to earn a living. It was the only refuge whenever the world became too loud. In July 1995, during a vacation trip with his wife, Charlie Rich passed away from a blood clot in his lung. No noise, no spotlight, just a weary man finally finding the peace he had spent his whole life searching for. After Charlie Rich passed away, Nashville finally stopped and truly looked at the legacy he left behind. Old articles and former colleagues began to admit something no one was willing to acknowledge during his peak years. Charlie Rich was never a difficult man. He was simply too honest for an industry that had no room for fragility. When his songs were revisited, they carried a different shade of meaning, as if behind every lyric there was a loneliness he had spent his whole life trying to hide. His son, friends, and fans all said the same thing. Charlie always felt like he didn't belong anywhere, like a wanderer in the very industry that had once celebrated him. As time passed, the silence surrounding Charlie Rich stopped feeling like an ending and instead became a gentle acknowledgement. Some artists don't shine through noise. They shine through what they leave in the hearts of those who listen. His career may not have been perfect, but the emotion he poured into his music never faded. And it is those quiet spaces after his departure that helped the world finally understand the true value of the silver fox. As the final curtain falls, we can still picture Charlie Rich sitting in a quiet room, facing the old piano that had carried him through half a lifetime. No spotlight, no expectations, only the soft, breath-like notes of a man who had lived with too many feelings. Charlie Rich was never a loud legend. He was the kind of artist whose single line of melody could make listeners pause and look inward. A genius who never wanted the center of attention, a sensitive heart in a world that demanded hardness. His life had dazzling peaks, invisible wounds, and one rebellious moment that Nashville will never forget. But in the end, what remained was not scandal. It was the unmistakable soul of an artist too honest to hide himself. If you have ever loved Behind Closed Doors, ever listened to The Most Beautiful Girl, or ever felt the quiet ache in the Silver Fox's voice, share your feelings. Which Charlie Rich song stays with you the most? Leave a comment, so his story can keep living in the hearts of country music lovers.